They cut through my fence and stole my water. Not borrowed it, not asked about it, not even pretended to negotiate. They just sliced the wire, dug into the ground, and decided what was mine was theirs. And 4 months later, their shiny little housing development was bankrupt. I didn't plan on becoming the villain in somebody else's real estate dream. I bought my land because I wanted quiet. That's it. 8 acres at the end of a gravel road outside a town most maps forget to label. The pavement gives up about half a mile before you reach my mailbox. After that, it's dust in the summer, mud in the winter, and peace all year round. The property isn't fancy. Rocky slopes, scrub oak, a few stubborn pines that lean like they've been arguing with the wind for decades. But tucked down in the lower corner of the land is a spring-fed pond, about half an acre across. It's not some postcard lake with a dock and a canoe. It's a working pond. It feeds my garden through a gravity line I ran myself the first summer I moved in. Tomatoes, squash, beans, a few fruit trees that finally started producing last year. Out here, water isn't a luxury. It's survival. I'm not some off-grid extremist. I've got power, internet that mostly works, and I drive into town once or twice a week. But I chose this place because nobody bothers you at the end of a gravel road. Or at least, that's what I thought. Then came the signs. Cedar Ridge Preserve. Luxury mountain living. Private roads. Gated entrance. Starting in the mid-700s. They went up on the property next to mine, the big parcel that had been cattle pasture for as long as I could remember. I knew eventually somebody would develop it. That's just how things go. But I figured it'd be slow. A few houses maybe. Not a full-blown subdivision. The first time I met the project manager, his name was Bryce Halston, he pulled up in a brand new white truck with tinted windows and tires that had never seen dirt. He stepped out wearing boots so clean they looked rented, a hard hat that might as well have had the sticker still on it. He smiled like we were already friends. "Afternoon," he said, sticking out a hand. Just introducing myself to the neighbors. I wiped my palm on my jeans before shaking his. "You found the only one." He laughed a little too hard at that. He asked the usual questions. Property lines, easements, access roads. Then, casual as you please, he said, "You want a well out here?" "Nope," I told him. "Spring-fed pond." His eyebrows lifted just slightly. Not surprise. Interest. Reliable. Has been longer than I've been alive. He nodded, looked out toward the trees where the pond sat hidden from the road. Good to know. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Developers ask questions. That's their job. And I didn't have anything to hide. Construction started fast. Faster than I expected. They brought in earth movers, graders, concrete trucks. Within weeks, the quiet I'd paid for was replaced by backup alarms and diesel engines. I won't pretend I liked it, but I figured it was temporary. Progress, right? About 3 months in, I walked down to the pond one evening with a bucket to check the pump line. That's when I noticed the shoreline looked wrong. The rocks along the edge that were usually half submerged were fully exposed. I crouched down and pressed my palm into the damp mud. The water level had dropped at least 6 inches. Now, ponds fluctuate. Evaporation happens. But this was early spring. We'd had decent rain. The ground was still holding moisture. It didn't make sense. I told myself not to overreact. Maybe it was a dry spell. Maybe I was imagining it. 2 weeks later, it was down another 6 inches. That's when my stomach started doing that slow, heavy roll. The kind that tells you something isn't right even if you can't see it yet. I walked the entire perimeter of the pond, boots sinking into soft spots, scanning for leaks, sinkholes, anything. The dam was intact. No new animal burrows. No obvious drainage channels. Then I started thinking upstream. The spring that feeds the pond surfaces higher up the slope, just a trickle at first, then pooling before it flows down. I followed the path I've walked 100 times before. Halfway up the hill, near the fence line that separates my land from the new development, I saw fresh dirt. Not just disturbed soil. A trench. Straight as a ruler. My chest tightened. I walked faster. The trench ran directly under my barbed wire fence, which had been cut clean through and twisted back like it was an inconvenience. On the other side, the trench continued into their property. I knelt down and brushed away loose soil. Black poly pipe. Brand new. For a second, I just stared at it. My brain trying to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe it wasn't connected. Maybe it was some old line. Maybe. I followed it. The pipe ran underground about 50 yards into their construction site. I kept my phone out, camera recording without really thinking about it. past stacks of lumber, past pallets of shingles, until I saw it. A massive cylindrical water tank sitting beside their temporary concrete batch plant. The pipe fed directly into it. Concrete requires water. Lots of it. And they decided mine was easier than trucking it in. I stood there listening to the hum of their machinery, feeling something shift inside me. Not rage, not yet. It was more like disbelief slowly curdling into anger. They didn't ask. They didn't knock on my door. They didn't even try to hide it properly. They just cut my fence and tapped my spring like I was some unclaimed resource. I walked back to my truck and sat there for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slow. Then I called Bryce. He answered on the third ring, noise in the background. "Bryce, you run a pipe through my fence?" I asked. Silence. Not confusion. Silence. "I'm looking at a trench," I continued, keeping my voice level. "Cut wire. Black poly line running into your tank." He exhaled, long and annoyed, like I'd caught him in traffic. "We had some delivery delays," he said. "Water trucks fell behind. We made a temporary connection to stabilize production." "Temporary," I repeated. "With my water. It's just until supply catches up. We figured it wouldn't impact you." "Wouldn't impact me." I looked down at my boots, still muddy from the shrinking shoreline. "It's already impacting me," I said. "You shut it off." "Now. I'll look into it," he replied. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculation. They thought I wouldn't notice. Or wouldn't fight. I ended the call and drove straight into town to see my attorney, Daniel Reyes. I hadn't needed him for much before. A property line clarification years back. Nice guy. Sharp. When I showed him the video, he didn't say anything at first. Just watched it twice, jaw tightening slightly. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "How attached are you to that pond?" That's where everything changed. Daniel didn't ask that question because he thought I was sentimental. He asked it because he understood what I was really protecting. "How attached are you to that pond?" he repeated, folding his hands on the desk. "It's not decorative," I said. "It's my irrigation. It's my backup if the well ever goes dry. It's mine." He nodded slowly. "Good answer." He turned his monitor toward me and started pulling up old county records. Survey maps from the 1940s. Water appropriation filings. Yellow documents scanned into the system that most people never bother to read. "You're not just using that spring," he said. "You hold senior rights on it." I blinked. "Senior?" "In this state, water law runs on priority. First in time, first in right. That spring was registered to your parcel in 1946. Anything developed after that has to yield to you." He tapped the screen. "What they've done isn't just trespass. It's unauthorized diversion of a protected water source." The way he said it made it sound less like a neighbor dispute and more like a felony. I leaned back in the chair and let that sink in. I'd grown up around ranchers and farmers. I knew water could start wars, but I'd never imagined I'd be standing on that line. "What happens now?" I asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "We file for an emergency injunction. Today." There's something sobering about watching someone draft paperwork that could change another person's future. He worked calmly, methodically, attaching my video, referencing statutes, citing the seniority of the right. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. By the time I drove home that evening, the sun was setting behind the ridgeline, lighting up the half-built rooftops next door like they were already finished and proud of themselves. I slept maybe 3 hours. The next morning, just after 9, a county truck rolled down my gravel road. White door seal. Water Resources Division. Behind it, another SUV with a hydrologist from the state. Bryce must have seen them from his sight because within minutes, he came speeding over in his truck, dust trailing behind him. The county officer, a woman named Karen Holt, shook my hand and asked me to show them the trench. The hydrologist, an older guy named Mitch with a clipboard and eyes that had probably seen every water dispute in 3 counties, crouched down and started tracing the line. They followed the pipe the same way I had, but this time with measuring tools, flow meters, documentation. Bryce showed up halfway through, trying to look casual. "Morning," he said, but it came out tight. Karen didn't smile. "Mr. Halston, we're investigating a reported diversion." "It was temporary," he said quickly. "Supply chain delays. We intended to formalize an agreement." "Did you?" she asked. He didn't answer that. They measured the flow rate coming off the spring before it hit my pond. They measured what was being siphoned. Mitch ran numbers quietly, scribbling in the margin of his clipboard. Approximately 17,000 gallons over the past 3 weeks, he said finally. 17,000. Hearing it quantified like that did something to me. It wasn't just a drop in shoreline anymore. It was truckloads. It was days of irrigation. It was the margin between surviving a dry summer and watching everything shrivel. Karen walked straight onto the construction site without asking permission and followed the pipe to the tank. She located the valve, turned it slowly, and the hum of water filling the tank stopped. Bryce stepped forward. "You can't just." "I can," she said, not raising her voice. "And I just did." She handed him a cease and desist order on the spot. Temporary restraining order pending judicial review. Unauthorized diversion subject to civil and criminal penalties. The look on his face shifted from annoyance to something closer to fear. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said, glancing at me like I was the unreasonable one. "We're building homes. For families." I met his eyes. "With my water." He held my stare for a second, then looked away. Concrete trucks that had been lining up that morning idled awkwardly before being waved off. Workers stood around unsure what to do. You could feel the momentum stall. That's the thing about construction. It runs on schedule. Delays ripple. Within a week, the impact was obvious. Without a steady water supply, they couldn't mix concrete on site. Trucking in water at scale wasn't as simple as Bryce had made it sound. It required permits, coordination, costs they hadn't budgeted for because they'd chosen the cheaper option, foundations that were scheduled to be poured sat as rebar skeletons. Framing crews had to pause because slabs weren't ready. Subcontractors, who operate on tight margins, started asking questions about payment timelines. I didn't take pleasure in it. Not at first. I mostly felt wary, like I'd kicked a hornet's nest. A few days after the valve was shut off, Bryce showed up at my gate again, this time without the polished smile. He leaned against his truck and waited until I walked over. "You could have handled this differently," he said. "I asked you to shut it off, and I said I'd look into it. That wasn't good enough." He shook his head. "Do you have any idea what kind of financial pressure you just put on this project?" I let that hang for a second. "Do you have any idea what kind of pressure you put on my livelihood?" He exhaled sharply. "We would have compensated you. You didn't try. That was the core of it. Not the water. The assumption. They saw one guy at the end of a gravel road and calculated that I was cheaper than compliance." He climbed back into his truck without another word. 2 weeks later, Daniel filed the full civil suit. Trespass, theft of water, property damage for the cut fence and excavation, loss of use. He wasn't flashy about it. He just built the case brick by brick. The state, meanwhile, decided to pursue criminal charges for unauthorized diversion of a protected water source. That part surprised even me. Bryce called Daniel directly after that. I happened to be in the office when it came through on speaker. "We're willing to settle," Bryce said. His tone was different now. Less swagger, more calculation. Daniel glanced at me before responding. "On what terms?" "Restitution for estimated usage. Repair costs. A confidentiality agreement." There it was. They didn't want a record. They didn't want buyers Googling water theft. Daniel muted the call and looked at me. "Your call." I thought about my pond. About the cut fence twisted back like it was nothing. About the phrase "wouldn't impact you." "Unmute," I said. Daniel did. "No," I said into the phone. "We're not settling." There was a long pause on the other end. "You're making a mistake," Bryce said quietly. "Maybe," I replied. "But it's mine to make." After that, things escalated. Rumors started circulating in town that I was anti-development, that I was trying to block housing. A couple of buyers who had put deposits down on Cedar Ridge lots drove out to my property one afternoon, wanting to hear my side. I didn't invite them in. I just pointed up the hill. "Asked them why they cut my fence," I said. Some folks sympathized. Others muttered that progress always has casualties. I started to feel the weight of it. Not just legally, but socially. Small towns have long memories. One evening, sitting on my porch watching the sun dip behind the half-finished frames next door, I wondered if I should have taken the settlement. Fixed the fence. Cashed the check. Moved on. Then I looked at the pond. The water level had stabilized since the valve was shut off, but it hadn't fully recovered yet. It would take time. Natural flow. Patience. That's when I realized something. If I backed down, it wouldn't just be about me. It would set a precedent. That if you have enough money and enough urgency, you can just take what you need from the quiet guy down the road and smooth it over later. And that didn't sit right. The court date was set for early fall. By then, Cedar Ridge Preserve was already wobbling. By the time fall rolled in, the trees along my property line had started turning that dull gold they get before the first real cold snap, and Cedar Ridge Preserve looked less like a dream community and more like a paused movie set. Half-framed houses stood exposed to the wind. Concrete slabs baked in the sun with nothing on top of them. Piles of materials sat wrapped in plastic that flapped and snapped at night. You could feel it coming apart. The trial itself wasn't dramatic in the way TV makes it seem. No surprise witnesses bursting through doors. No shouting matches. Just a courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. A judge who had clearly seen his share of land disputes, and two sides telling very different versions of the same story. Bryce sat at the defense table in a suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders. He avoided looking at me at first. When he finally did, there was no smile left, no easy confidence. Just fatigue. Their attorney tried to frame it as an operational misjudgment. Temporary necessity. No malicious intent. He said the development had been under extreme pressure from investors, that supply chain disruptions had created a narrow window where concrete needed to be poured or contracts would collapse. He painted it as a split-second decision made in good faith. Daniel didn't raise his voice when he stood up. He didn't need to. He walked the court through the property records. The 1946 water registration. The senior rights doctrine. He played the video of the cut fence, the trench, the black pipes sliding under my land like it belonged there. Then he said something that stuck with me. Good faith, he told the judge, usually involves knocking on a door. The courtroom went quiet in a way that felt heavy, not theatrical. Even Bryce's lawyer stopped shuffling papers. The hydrologist testified about the 17,000 gallons diverted, explained how that volume affected downstream retention, how extended diversion during a dry cycle can permanently alter a small spring's behavior. It wasn't just about 3 weeks. It was about risk. When it was my turn to speak, I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I just told the truth. I talked about why I bought the land, about the pond, about building my irrigation line by hand, about walking down one evening and realizing something was wrong. I described the moment I saw my fence cut open, twisted back like trash. I didn't say I felt violated. I didn't have to. The judge asked Bryce one direct question near the end. Did you seek permission from the landowner before diverting water from his registered source? Bryce hesitated. Not long, but long enough. No, Your Honor. That was the crack. The ruling came 2 weeks later. Full restitution for the calculated water diversion, including environmental impact. Cost of restoration for the trenching and fence damage. Legal fees. Civil penalties for trespass and unauthorized use. And separate from that, the state's criminal fines for unlawful diversion of a protected water source. The numbers were substantial, not just uncomfortable, structural. I heard through town chatter that investors started pulling out almost immediately. Insurance premiums spiked. Buyers who were already nervous about delays backed away entirely once the judgment became public record. About 4 months after the ruling, Cedar Ridge Development Group filed for bankruptcy. I found out the way everyone does these days. A headline shared in a local Facebook group. Someone tagged me with a little smirking emoji. Bankruptcy isn't cinematic. It's paperwork. It's assets frozen and projects halted and phone calls that don't get returned. The half-built houses up the hill sat through winter storms, snow collecting in open frames, plywood warping. One afternoon in late January, Bryce came by again. No truck this time. He drove an older sedan. No hard hat. No polished boots. I was splitting firewood when he walked up. I figured you'd want to gloat, he said. I set the axe down and leaned against the stump. That why you're here? He shook his head. I'm here because I wanted you to hear it from me. We're done. Company's dissolving. There was no anger in his voice. Just something tired. You could have asked, I said, not accusing, just stating it. I know. He looked past me toward the pond, barely visible through the trees. We were under a lot of pressure, he said. Investors don't like delays. Every day costs money. I thought it was small enough you wouldn't notice. Or care. That was the honest part. I did notice, I replied. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Yeah, you did. We stood there in the cold for a minute. 2 men who had made different calculations and were living with the results. Do you think it was worth it? He asked finally. That question sat heavier than I expected. I looked around at my land. The fence had been repaired properly now. The trench filled and receded. The pond, after months of steady flow, had returned to its usual shoreline. The garden beds were resting under straw for the winter, waiting for spring. I didn't do it to ruin you, I said. I did it because if I let it slide, it wouldn't stop with me. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Then he walked back down the gravel road, and that was the last time I saw him. The development site stayed quiet for almost a year. Eventually, another company bought the parcel at auction. Smaller outfit, fewer homes planned. Before they moved a single shovel of dirt, their project manager came to my door with a folder in his hand. We want to make sure we understand all neighboring rights, he said. I invited him in for coffee. That's the ripple people don't talk about. Enforcement changes behavior, not through revenge, through precedent. Still, not everyone in town sees it that way. There are folks who think I overreacted, that I could have taken the settlement and kept things smooth, that jobs were lost because I pushed too hard. I've heard it at the feed store, felt it in the way conversations pause when I walk in. And sometimes, late at night, I do wonder, if Bryce had knocked on my door that first day and said, "We're in a bind. Can we work something out?" Would I have agreed? Maybe. Probably, if it was fair. I'm not unreasonable. I just don't respond well to being treated like background scenery. What changed me wasn't the lawsuit. It was the realization of how easy it is for someone with more capital and urgency to convince themselves your small piece of the world is expendable. Out here, water isn't abstract. It's dirt under your fingernails. It's the difference between a crop and a loss. It's continuity. The pond looks the same now as it did before all this. Ducks still land on it in the mornings. In summer, dragonflies hover over the surface like they own the place. Most days are quiet again. Gravel road, wind in the pines, the kind of silence that feels earned. But I'm different. I pay closer attention. I read documents more carefully. I don't assume politeness equals respect. And if you're listening to this thinking I went too far or not far enough, I'd honestly like to hear it. Should I have taken the settlement and moved on? Is protecting what's yours worth the collateral damage when a bigger machine grinds to a halt? At what point does standing up for yourself become stubbornness? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them. I'm curious where you land on it. Because out here, at the end of a gravel road, the lines between right and wrong aren't always drawn in ink. Sometimes they're drawn in water.